Several former Utah football players will hear their names called tonight in the 2024 NFL Draft. Which teams are the best fits for these former Utes? Let's discuss on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media, where you can follow our show at Locked On Utes today. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it's why I'm a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play Store. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department, and I'm excited to be joined by ESPN 700's Porter Larsen to talk about some of the best fits for these former Utes. It's been a long draft process. The Senior Bowl seems like it was a while ago. It even seems like it's been longer since we saw this banged-up Utah defense running around, this banged-up Utah team, I should just say, against Colorado, and now we're set to see all these former Utes hear their names called tonight. This is coming out on Friday, so the first round is come and gone. Not surprising that we didn't hear any Utah players' names called. And if this ages poorly, congrats to somehow a Utah player getting drafted in the first round, because that would be a wild turn of events. But, really quick before we dive into the fit by fit, Porter, my personal feeling on the draft this year is that we will hear at this exact moment, I'm going to go with 4 Utah football players hearing their names called. Keaton Bills is right on the cusp for me, but at this exact moment, I'm going to say he goes undrafted. How many Utes are you feeling that will hear their names called in the final 2 rounds of the draft?
I mean, you're on the right mark. I think that Keaton is the main kind of fringe player, right? I would not be surprised to see him picked up really late, right, in the 6th, 7th round. But ultimately, it might be better for a player like Keaton to wait it out and see what might be a best fit, right? Where he can actually find a way into the practice squad or find a way onto the active roster, a team with a real need on the interior of the offensive line. But outside of that, yeah, I think you're right. We'll see a Vaki, an Ellis, a Cole Bishop, the Sata Laumea, and then we'll go from there. But ultimately, I do believe those 4 players will be selected during the NFL draft. And as you said, we're recording this a little early. I don't think any of them will be day 1 guys. In fact, the first local guy off the board, I will almost guarantee you will be out of BYU, but rightfully so. It's a really good player there. So, those are the 4 that'll hear their names called in all likelihood. But Keaton, Devaughn Vele, those are guys that I do think, and we can get into the others as well, will hear their name called, but maybe not from the draft stage. Maybe a undrafted free agent call from one of the 30 plus GMs in the NFL.
Yeah, shortly after, we'll see a tweet from one of the insiders that so-and-so a team has signed a Miles Battle, whoever it might be, as an undrafted.
I'll let you know.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, you might be one of them. Exactly. Yeah. So that would be something that would be awesome to see. But let's jump up to the top of the draft. The Utes we think will be selected. I'm going to go in the order that I think the Utah players will be selected. So I've long said for a little bit now, the biggest needle mover for me for why I'm going to go Cole Bishop being the first guy over Jonah Ellis at this moment was what Jim Nagy put out a few weeks ago, talk about NFL teams are really high on Bishop, more than it's kind of been let out to be. So I do think Bishop is going to be a guy who goes tonight on Friday night. And as for teams I'd love to see, I'm going to start first with taking him back to his home state. We greatly appreciate that he came out to play at Utah, but I would love to see him end up with the Falcons. I think that's a team that's trying and ready to win right now. I think they have a need and an opening at safety, and whatever team gets Cole Bishop, I think they're going to quickly fall in love with him because he's just the type of guy who is going to make the big play on 3rd down. He's going to bring, if it's 3rd and short, he's going to want to shoot through the gap, get the big sack too as well in a 3rd and long situation too with his blitzing ability. So would love to see him end up on the Falcons. Packers are another team that we know they have a winning pedigree. I think they have another need at safety, and there'd just be something about seeing Cole Bishop on the Seahawks defense that would just seem natural to me. So those are 3 teams I would love to see Cole go to. What do you think about those fits, and where would you love to see him end up?
Well, I like all of the fits you mentioned. I think you said Seattle, Atlanta, and what was the other one you mentioned? Green Bay, yeah. I mean, those are all good fits as far as what he can do as a defensive back. Now, the interesting thing with Cole and with Sione Vaki, rather, is that it's hard to really nail down specific teams because those players are so versatile, right? It's almost like a Julian Blackmon a few years ago. Different players, but Julian was seen as such a tough prospect to mock because certain teams valued certain skill sets and certain things he did way differently than others, right? Indianapolis ended up being pretty high on him and taking him earlier than I think a lot of people were expecting, even coming off of the ACL surgery, because of how versatile he is, right? Because he can play safety, he can play corner, he can play up in the box, he can play back in coverage. Cole Bishop provides that exact same thing. So it's really tough to nail down, a specific fit, a specific team, because you can go in and throw him on the back end and he can be good in coverage. You can go and put him up in the box and in that, kind of a hybrid role where you see Baltimore, right? Those safeties sometimes basically play linebacker. Cole Bishop is a player who can do a lot of that. So I'm with you on the three teams you mentioned. I have no issue with that, but I also look at some of those teams that play a more upfront style of defense, right? Where they bring a safety up into the box. They allow one of their DBs to basically be maybe a blitzer or a run stopper, or kind of a hybrid role like Baltimore does. But Baltimore doesn't have any needs there. They've got a whole defense full of guys like that.
Or you,
defenses that use players like that, or Minnesota.
Talking to a Vikings fan here, so I like that.
But I do struggle with really identifying specific teams outside of the ones you mentioned, just because Cole is so versatile and so good at pretty much everything he can do. And he answered some questions in that regard as well in the pre-draft process, right? Coming into the draft, everyone knew he's a good tackler. He's good up in the box. He can play the run. He can rush the passer. But a lot of the concern, I don't know if I want to call it concern, but the question was, can he play center fielder, right? Yeah. Can he cover sideline to sideline 20, 30 yards down the field? Because we didn't see a whole lot of that during his time with the University of Utah, because he did play up along the line of scrimmage a lot. Yeah. He answered those calls at the combine, at pro days. Not only was he really good with the ball skill stuff, but he ran a really good 40, and the explosiveness numbers were off the charts. So specific landing spot, I don't know, any team that needs a really good safety who can do a lot of good things, right? The versatility and the utility of one Cole Bishop makes him a prospect that pretty much anyone who needs depth at the safety position, they're going to take a look at Cole Bishop. But having those picks available, I think in the late second, early third, and the rest of the third round, those are the teams that you want to look at. And as the days progress, those teams that still have those picks and do have a need for defensive back, I don't see many of those teams passing on a Cole Bishop.
I absolutely agree. And you make such a good point about last year when we were doing this, Dalton Kincaid, it was like, okay, we can find the teams that want to, and the Bills had Dawson Knox, but still it was just like, it made sense. There were rumors in the pre-draft process. Only so many teams look at tight end in the first round. When you say, how many teams need help in the defensive backfield and the safety, you can do a lot of things. It's like, oh yeah, basically the entire NFL. So that's where that one becomes a much longer list. And you know who else that applies for? Not just Sione Vaki, but specifically a skill set that every NFL team wants. Guys who can get after the quarterback. The list of suitors for Jonah Ellis' services are probably going to be long, and guys and NFL teams are going to have him high on their draft board. Well, I'm going to talk about some of the teams I would love to see Jonah Ellis go to in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you guys about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes. It's our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. And once again, you can head over to ebaymotors.com today. Porter, keeping it moving. We're moving on now to the next Ute I expect to be drafted. I was curious, by the way, do you Do you think Ellis is going off the board first or Bishop? Where are you leaning right now as we sit here?
Yeah, I struggle with who goes first just because it is how the day goes about, what trades happen, who picks where. And I think that these two are actually really close as far as where they are mocked, right? Both, I would say, likely in the third round, but I would not be surprised at all if Cole sneaks into the top 2 rounds. I'm going to go Bishop first, and then I think that Jonah Ellis gets nabbed shortly after that in the 3rd or 4th round. But Jonah's an interesting one, man. It's a prospect who we talked about it a lot, right? Great pass rusher, has all the tools in the book when it comes to getting to the quarterback. A little undersized for the edge position at the NFL, so I kind of see him at a particular spot when it comes to NFL teams, right? A team that has that odd man front, and he's probably going to be an outside linebacker more than a defensive end, right? Yep. And I think that is the role that you see for a Jonah Ellis in the NFL. You look to his brother in Caden Ellis, who's kind of had that same maturation as well, right? So that's where I see a Jonah Ellis fitting. And because of that, because he's maybe not as versatile and more of a specific landing spot, I do see Cole coming off the board before him, because it's really any team that has a need in the defensive backfield that would feel comfortable bringing Cole Bishop into their locker room.
Yeah, you're right. Ellis does fit more into a particular style and system, but look, he gets after the quarterback. So there are going to be a lot of teams that want a guy like that. And I don't think Ellis will be drafted to be a day 1 starter, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's the 3rd guy in a rotation and, in pass rush situations too, whether he is lining up as an outside linebacker, or maybe they even look at it like, we like the pass rush moves, the bevy of them you can throw at guys, rather than put you on offensive tackles who are better in pass protection. Let's throw you on the interior and get you against some of those guards where you can use that quick spin move if we can shift the line a little bit and do things of that nature. And that's what excites me a lot about Ellis, is that if I'm an NFL team, I'm not looking at him as a project. He can come in and produce for me right away. So a couple of the teams that I think would be interesting for him, just in terms of spots, there are so many once again, but spots I would like for him where I think he gets a lot of reps. I think the Colts, they have some solid pass rushers, but I think there could be an opportunity for him there to become one of their main guys. The Buccaneers don't have the most potent pass rushers right now. That was another one I looked at, and I'd love to get him on a contender too. So let's throw him on Buffalo. They just lost Leonard Floyd. That'd be another spot too, where maybe they're looking at, and they've had a good history of drafting and developing edge rushers too. So maybe Ellis could head out there, join Dalton Kincaid. Those are just a couple that I think would be great fits for Ellis. But is there a destination that jumps out to you, where especially listing the qualities you think that NFL teams will look for in Ellis, being an undersized guy, that you think would fit his skills best?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's going to be one of those teams with that odd man front that's going to use him, as it more of an outside linebacker in that kind of 3-4 role. So I narrow it down to teams that, number one, run that system. Number 2, have selections in the 3rd or 4th round. And number 3, have the needs for a defensive end, for an outside linebacker, an edge there. I like the teams that you mentioned. I'll add the Dallas Cowboys. I'm a Cowboys fan. I would love to see Jonah Ellis with a star on his helmet. I thought the same about Bradley and Mika Tafua, and got those. We'll maybe get Jonah in there as well, and hopefully on the active roster rather than just a practice squad guy. But I think that he is more of a dynamic linebacker edge combo player than a Bradley, who was really a true edge. So I do think that he may have some more opportunities there. The only other team that really stands out for me that's picking in that range is Seattle. I think Seattle is going to go after pass rushers. If they don't get Liatu Latu early, which I do think that they'll try to do in the 1st or 2nd round, if they don't land a Liatu Latu or another really high-end defensive end in the early parts of the draft, looking at Seattle in the 3rd or 4th round, and I'd keep an eye on them for one Jonah Ellis.
I love that you brought up Latu, because Latu, being a 1st round type of player, at his position is the exact reason that a guy like Sata Laumea is going to be shifting inside to guard, because Latu gave him everything he could handle in that game. And I do feel like Sata projects best as a guard at the next level, can do a number of things really well, and plays once again, a position of high importance, protecting your quarterback along that offensive line. You were trying to give Ellis to your Cowboys. I'm going to step in for my Vikings here. I would love to have Sata in as one of the guards for my team. And whether or not he's a early starter, because I think he's capable of starting, but even if he had to sit a year or two and then become that guy, I think that would be great. I think with how much the physical culture Antonio Pierce is trying to instill in the Raiders, I would love to see him head over there and be able to be up front and blocking for their guys. And then the last one, let's have him go join Braden Daniels again. Send him over to the Commanders. They desperately need offensive line help once they select. At the time I'm recording this, I assume Jaden Daniels. If not, potentially, I'm sorry, Commanders fans, depending on who else it might be. But those are the three teams that I would go for Sata. It's another one that's kind of hard to narrow down because when you say offensive line help, a lot of teams need it, Porter. But any in particular you think it'd be fun to see him at?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's looking to protect their quarterback. Everyone's looking to get a push up front. Mm-hmm. I like that you did mention, right, he's projected more as an interior guy.
Yeah.
From what I'm hearing also from folks around the league is that the projections of him as an interior guy are much higher than as a tackle, right? Yeah. They watched that film, and I think a lot of scouts were, a little turned off is not the right word, but when they watched him at tackle, they were wondering what happened to the Sata Laumea that we saw last year or the year before, right? And then you go back and watch the film when he's playing guard, it's just so much more natural. He's able to use his physicality a bit better. He's able to keep guys close to him, right? The stretch and the reach is something that he struggled with a little bit at the tackle position, which, I mean, that usually takes 5-10 years of playing that position to really, really get down. So you don't blame him for that, but you understand why there was questions regarding him as a tackle. I think he does project really, really well as a guard. There's been teams that have been having him take snaps, right, at Senior Bowl and at Pro Days just to see how he could maybe fit as the center, because he is, he's long as an interior guy. So he still has the potential to move around the offensive line and play multiple positions, and that is attractive for NFL teams that are looking for an offensive lineman. I look at teams probably in the 5th or 6th round. 5th is optimistic. But the 6th round, I think I really target teams that are looking for offensive linemen in that frame. And I look at the Chargers. They need help in the interior.
Yeah, Harbaugh would love that. Great one.
I look at Cleveland. The Browns have, I think the Browns have 2 or 3 picks in the 5th, 6th rounds, and they need help on the interior. So if Sata Laumea is available and we get into 5 or 6, I would look at LA. I would look at Cleveland. And then the ones that you brought up, I don't have any issue with as well.
One thing about Laumea, I'll say too, we agree, he's both better at a guard. You can only dress so many guys in the NFL on game day. So if you're telling me he is like my 3rd or 4th string emergency tackle, once again, I wouldn't project him at that spot, but that's just a nice luxury to be able to have, is the fact that he is versatile, can learn other positions too. If I needed to throw him out there in case of an injury, got to believe that's going to be an attractive thing for an NFL team. Speaking of versatility, so let's talk about Sione Vaki now. He is a guy that I'm going to go. Yeah, he's a guy that one of the teams that jumps out to me about Vaki, and I know it's been, a little rumored ever since he was brought up, but just hearing the Jets defensive coordinator rave about Sione and all the things he can do is something I can't get out of my mind. So I did have Vaki going to the Jets in the first one here. I would also just love to see him go, because I do feel like there's still some development that, needs to go along and into his game, hence why he is going to fall a little bit. And of these guys is either going to be the 3rd or 4th Ute selected, depending on where Laumea does end up going to. I think going to the Rams would also be a really nice spot. I just think they have a really strong organization and all the things they're doing up there. And the last thing, I don't know, Sione just feels like a Dan Campbell guy to me too, a little bit, maybe counted out because of the size. And I just think that's another spot I'd love to see him too, whether he's getting a little run on offense at any of those spots, but more than likely settling in defensively, and especially playing a big special teams role early on. It's a number of places, as we talked about with Cole, that you can mock Sione too, but where are a couple of the fits that maybe excite you for his skill set, Porter?
Yeah, well, you brought up a good point in New York, where I think Sione Vaki is going to especially early in his NFL career, I think he's going to earn reps and playing time in special teams as well as anything, right? Just because his skill set is so hard to nail down, like what what do you actually want Sione Vaki to do for your NFL team? Now, it's a good problem to have, but as a prospect, sometimes it's hard when these guys are watching film and they're watching tape on hundreds of different players, thousands of different players in all likelihood. It's hard when, your skill set is so varied that maybe these NFL scouts, these NFL coaches don't know exactly what to do with you, right? Now, once a team gets Sione Vaki and he's in their locker room and he's wearing their jersey, that won't be a problem because he can tackle, he can run the football, he can catch the football, he can cover punts, he can
take ankles, do whatever.
Hell, he can rush the passer, right?
Yeah, exactly. He's a good blitzer, yeah.
I was talking to Jim Nagy at the Senior Bowl, and not at the Senior Bowl, but I was talking to Jim Nagy, who was at the Senior Bowl. I was not there. And he was telling me, he's like, I've never had a guy who is taking reps at running back, receiver, defensive end. Yes, he was taking reps as an edge, linebacker, and defensive backfield. And he was catching punts and doing special team stuff. Like, there has never been a player who has done all of those things at a Senior Bowl or one of the prospect showcase type events. So he specifically is much like Cole Bishop, really tough to nail down a specific team or a good fit for a Sione Vaki. But where I would like to see him is a franchise and organization who is open to using him in those ways, right? Kyle Shanahan comes to mind, where if he is in San Francisco, he's probably going to touch the football. He's probably going to tackle people. There are certain coaches who they like to stick guys in boxes and keep them there. And, maybe it's an old school thing where you want to keep things how you're used to seeing them, right? And then there's some coaches who are really open to experimenting, really open to listening to folks in their locker room, trying different things. Mike McDaniel in Miami, he is open to trying anything when it comes to the playbook, when it comes to schematics. Give a guy like that Sione Vaki, and you will see wonders. What I'm worried about is Sione being such a good defender, such a physical defensive guy, that he gets drafted to a team in. I don't necessarily want to single out a certain coach, but Bill Belichick is
that's what I was thinking. Yep.
But I'm thinking of a guy like Bill Belichick who might draft Sione Vaki and then just play him as a safety, right? Yeah, you're my Rodney Harrison. That's it, and go from there. That's my worry with Sione, because I think it would completely limit him as a player. What you saw at Utah, I hope, is something that transfers to the NFL, but it's going to have to be in a team that is open to letting him be an experiment, letting him be a Frankenstein of sorts, where, put him together, let him go out there and do his thing. And I think that regardless of where that is, you're going to see positives. If he's just covering punts, he's going to be making plays doing that. If he's returning punts, he's going to be productive in doing that. If you want to use him as a full-time defensive back, he's going to be productive. But I hope that if you do that, you watch what Utah did, and you also understand that you can put him in a position offensively like a Deebo Samuel. I'm not calling Sione Deebo Samuel. Yeah. It's one of the best players in the NFL. But if you look at his skill set out of the backfield, out wide as a wide receiver, he does similar things to Deebo Samuel in that regard. And I hope that a team that is experimental like a San Francisco is open to picking him up and using him in that regard.
I would love to see that too. And I'm really excited to see Sione. And it's funny that, I think just what you were describing was an old school style coach. So I'm sure that's why we both went to Bill Belichick in that exact moment too. So, that makes sense. But still have a few more Utes want to talk about before we wrap this one up. But before we do that, do want to talk to you guys about our friends at Monopoly Go. We've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard isn't looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friend's money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. Play on countless Dynamic Monopoly boards make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. Charge other players rent on their iconic properties. And you can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in-tournament to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go now. Free on the App Store or Google Play Store. Porter, we're wrapping up with our final few Utes here. And I think the first few guys you got to mention are the likes of, you're saying the Keaton Bills, right? Like when you're talking about a Keaton Bills, Keaton is a guy for me. 49ers would be a great fit because what do the 49ers offer? They're a team that develops offensive linemen really well. Outside of that, maybe some teams he can play early on with, right? Whether you're talking about the likes of an Arizona or a Giants, all teams that I think have fits along the offensive line that I think make a lot of sense if he were to end up there, let's per se. Also talking about Devaughn Vele. Let's move on to him and what he could offer an NFL team. I think the Saints, that's the type of guy we've seen. They kind of need. Michael Thomas didn't pan out. They ended up cutting him. A long receiver is maybe a spot they need in the long term. So Devaughn comes in and develops. The Patriots love their receivers that can block. So I think that one could make some sense as an undrafted free agent, which is what all four of these final guys I'm going to discuss what I think they would be too. Moving on from that, then you're looking at a team like the Broncos, right? I already talked about how Sean Payton used Michael Thomas as a long receiver. Why not give him Michael Thomas? So I think that one would make a lot of sense. His new Michael Thomas and potentially Devaughn Vele after he develops and grows over time, but just a spot where, and I think they could use a receiver after Jerry Jeudy's departure. Outside of that, then you're looking at Thomas Yasmin and what he can kind of do from there. Yasmin is a guy I would love to see end up on, because Yasmin's kind of a luxury pick. That's how I kind of see him, Porter, when you're talking about Yasmin. If you're looking at the Chiefs, the Ravens, and the Bills, all luxury picks for a tight end, that's where I think it would make a lot of sense for Yasmin to go. And the last one I'll close out with is Miles Battle. I actually did have your Cowboys on here for Miles Battle, potentially just another secondary piece, maybe as an undrafted free agent, and Dolphins and Steelers too, places where I like the culture, where you can come in, contribute on special teams, maybe have a chance to make the team and go from there. You had some technical difficulties, so you weren't able to hear me run through all of those, Porter. But before we do get out of here, give me your brief thoughts on Keaton Bills, Devaughn Vele, Thomas Yasmin, and Miles Battle.
Yeah, and sorry about that. I don't know what's going on with the internet situation. You'd think that this studio would have good Wi-Fi, but no worries. Yeah, those are all guys that I do think at least get options, right? As far as the undrafted free agents, maybe even just rookie minicamp invites. It's hard in the NFL, man. There's so many different ways that NFL teams can kind of sign you, right? Whether you're a rookie minicamp invite, an undrafted free agent, practice squad guy, there's going to be opportunities for all of these guys at the next level. Yep. But you bring up Keaton Bills. Obviously, he's projected as a guard. He's taken some reps at center. NFL teams really like his mobility, his ability to get out and pull in the run game. He'll have to, and during the pre-draft process, part of that, he'll have to kind of solidify their thoughts on his pass protection. I do know that is where some of the questions were, but I also think that's part of Utah's struggles there last year, right? With a different quarterback behind you. That's a chemistry that I don't think that a lot of people necessarily understand, right? You have a quarterback behind you. You don't necessarily usually think that that's going to affect how you're blocking the guy in front of you. But Keaton Bills talked to me about that a little bit during the season, where Cam is such a unique scrambler and manipulator of the pocket that when there were different quarterbacks behind him, it was a total adjustment for the first few weeks of the season, trying to block for a guy who has a different pocket presence, a different feel of the pressure, of the rush, who steps up into the pocket differently. You saw that with Bryson. It was different. And I think it kind of affected some of the offensive linemen in their pass protection early on. But for Keaton, that's what you'll have to address there. I think he's going to get an undrafted free agent invite, and probably more likely that Keaton makes a roster than some of those other guys, in my opinion. Devaughn Vele, this is an interesting one, man, because he has, since basically spring ball, when he got here, right? We hadn't really heard his name, wasn't a highly touted recruit, but he burst onto the scene. Yeah, he was a walk-on, and he burst onto the scene. And we're like, who is this 6'5", 220-pound, athletic wide receiver? Is this the number one guy that we've been looking for at Utah for a decade? And it never quite materialized. part of that was the fact that you had a bunch of weapons in Dalton Kincaid and Britton Covey and Brant Kuithe and Thomas Yasmin. It's hard to separate yourselves from the pack when all those guys are in the locker room. But even last year, when you needed that, right? You needed a guy for Bryson Barnes to count on as that number one. It never quite materialized to, what we thought Devaughn Vele could be. And I think what Devaughn Vele could be is still untapped, right? I mentioned all those intangibles, the measurements, the ball skills, the height, everything about it. Devaughn Vele projects as a legitimate NFL wide receiver. We just haven't seen him catch the balls like a legitimate NFL wide receiver, at least at the rate that we want to see him do it at. And I think that once Devaughn finds a spot, once Devaughn, even if it's a rookie minicamp invite, I think he's going to stick on a roster because he is all of those things, right? But at Utah, when you're running the ball 25, 30, 35 times a game, when you're leaning on the tight ends in the pass game, when you have guys like Britton Covey, who are possession receivers, right? We're going back a little farther now. But when Devaughn Vele was on this roster, it's always been, the cards are stacked against him as far as getting touches. That won't be the case at the NFL or at mini camp invites or, wherever it may be. And I think, and I hope that Devaughn sees more action at the NFL level than he ever did at the college level. And hopefully that helps him stick. But where that is, no idea, because he is going to be an undrafted free agent in all likelihood. And at that moment, it's going to be up to Devaughn, because he's probably going to have 3 or 4 teams that at least say, hey, we've seen you at pro days. We've interviewed you. We like what we've seen in those two aspects. We got questions about what we saw on tape because we didn't see much as far as a number one guy. And, once he addresses a lot of those questions, I think that Devaughn Vele is a capable enough wide receiver to make an active roster in the NFL. Whether that happens or not is as questionable as why we didn't see him kind of materialize as the number one guy here in Salt Lake City. But I think he does have a really, really good opportunity to probably be more productive at the NFL level than he even was at Utah. But you got to find the right system. You got to find the right place. And then you have to make the roster. And if Devaughn can do that, I do think he has the intangibles. He has the skill set. He has the measurements to be a pretty good wideout.
It's going to be exciting to see what the future holds for him, as well as some of these other guys, Porter. And it's just going to be fun to see all the draft coverage. Of course, there will always be conversations after the draft too. And there's always conversations in the sports world. But if people want the best of them in Utah, where should they head over to? Yeah,
of course, we are live every day on ESPN 700. You can catch Bill in the mornings and middays, whatever it is, 11 to 2. And then Spence and I in the afternoons from 2 to 6. Twitter handle's right down there. And you can find me there. Usually tweeting about sports, sometimes abrasive conversations with others, but hey, that's what Twitter is for. Exactly. And of course, conversation every day on air, and appreciate anyone who follows along. And sorry for the technical difficulties. I kept dropping out for some reason. Hopefully you can splice it all together and we can get 20 or so minutes of NFL draft combo.
We definitely did. We appreciate you taking the time as always, Porter. Thank you.
Thanks, JT. Appreciate it, man.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes, but we look forward to being back with you next week to react to where all of these Utah players ended up in the draft.
Sweet.